Hi guys, thanks for joining in my tutorial today. I'm going to be showing you how to paint a cactus, mainly a paddle cactus, and this is the kind that has those really cute paddles that kind of stack on top of each other and then grows prickly pear fruit. So to paint this prickly pear cactus, I'm going to show you a few different techniques of how you let the water blend in and you're really using the color very loosely. So I did sketch this on beforehand, and I'm going to provide a printout for you. So if you want to print out the design already and then just trace it, that's an option for you if you don't want to have to draw it out, if sketching isn't your strong suit. But I'm just taking an eraser really fast and just kind of lightening my lines a little bit because I don't love it when my pencil shows through, but it's okay if a little bit does. So there's my cactus. You might not be able to see it super well right now because I did want it light. So I'm going to be using a few different colors for this, mainly greens and browns, and we're going to drop in some different consistencies of color. So again, I'm going to be blending in my big palette like I did in my last class. I will link my last class in the description below if you want to check that one out. That just teaches you the basic 3 most important things that beginners tend to forget or do wrong when they're first learning, so you can take that if you haven't seen it yet. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of brown, so brown that I'm mixing into kind of my green area in my palette. You can see it over to the right here. But I'm going to take some green. I just have this kind of bright green right now, and then I might take a little bit of my more neutral green. You can use any green that you have, really. You could even bring, honestly, like a little bit of yellow in. I kind of just let all of my colors blend together in my palette because I love the kind of natural look it gives it. So if you're wondering if it's bad to let your colors bleed together, no, it's not. If you want to do this too, just grab a porcelain or glass dinner plate and use that to blend your colors and just let them all run together. So I'm going to use this really natural green, and I'm going to test it on my test card. It looks like that. And this green is just super neutral. And again, like I mentioned in my last class, you want it to be really watery so that it can spread around and looks kind of like a puddle from the side. That's the most important thing that people forget to do. And they end up painting really thick like acrylic. So I'm going to go back to my water. Right now I'm using a size 7 brush, and this is on my supplies list, which I'll also link in the description below if you want this kind. It is animal hair and it works amazing. And this is my bigger brush, and then I'll also use a smaller brush for some details. But I'm going to take this color now, a lot of water with it, and I'll show you a few different techniques. So first, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start painting one of my paddles. It doesn't really matter which one you start with, but I'm going to go ahead and just start with this one. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm using the tip of my brush to kind of outline the outside. Really what I'm doing, I'm not outlining, but I'm creating a little bit of a barrier for where I want my water to stop, like a barrier to this puddle that we're making. And I'm going to go ahead and go all the way across. I'm going to start to fill this in. So you can see that it's really watery. If you can't actually see that, just know this is really watery. And when I'm giving it that outline or giving it that barrier to where the color needs to stop, I'm using a ton of water so that it doesn't ever dry. If it were to dry in outline, it's going to actually look like a solid line around and it won't be able to spread in. So now I'm going to show you a technique that is super unique and cool in watercolor. This is wet still, and I'm going to drop in some color from the top. I'm going to imagine the lights hitting this side of the paddle, coming from the right down. But I'm going to drop in some color like this. And it's really cool because it does the spreading and the blending for you, and it is going to leave like a rippled line across the paddle, and that's the kind of style we really want. We want to let it kind of puddle and settle this way, and you can kind of play with it. You notice like I take my brush and I just pull across, and I'm just leaving this right side lightened. So that is one of our paddles. Now let's go ahead and just work on another one. Remember, you can always revisit this and rewind, so it doesn't have to be perfect on your first try. You can do this same painting a couple times, but I'm just gonna move down here. I'm gonna go ahead and do that lighter green. Now I'm gonna show you another technique, which is I put a little bit of light green in there, but I'm just gonna go back to my water and just keep painting with water, and it might look pretty clear, but just remember that this is super watery. It has not dried. You don't want it to dry until we're ready for it to be complete. So that's just super light and watery. And now I can go back to my green and drop the green in like we did before. But now if we spread it across the whole thing, it's gonna dilute it. And essentially what we're doing here is we're just filling it in. We're giving it a water wash first, and then we're filling it in afterwards. And this is still kind of the light green, but it's just a nice technique for getting water on there quickly before we have to actually go and bring our color in. So that's technique number 2, a water wash before bringing any color in. Now this one still needs a bit of a shadow, and I'm gonna go ahead and add that now. And the shadow on this one is gonna be more towards the bottom. I'm actually making up a little bit more color, so I'm mixing brown, a hair of black or sepia, which is a really, really dark brown, and a little bit of green, maybe some yellow again, to make a dark, dark green. You can see there's a little bit of brown stuck in there. But I'm making that dark, dark green, and then I'm just gonna spread it up into here. And that is what I want to kind of leave it as. The light's going to hit these differently because of where they're sitting. Some are sitting like below others and whatnot. So if you were to see a picture of a cactus like this, it's not going to necessarily have the same light consistency, just saying like the light comes from the right, if that makes sense. It's going to kind of be affected by where the other ones sit. So I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. So it might not be 100% accurate on where the light's hitting it, but it will look great anyways. I'm gonna work on this one over here. And basically I'm just kind of filling in the pieces one by one. Now, if you're gonna work on one that's next to another one that's still wet, and that's why I chose this one, you just wanna be careful not to let all of the color of this one bleed into this one. So we want these to still look like their own separate pieces, and it's kind of hard to control. So I always try to dry my brush like I'm doing here, and just ever so slightly take some of that water away from this side right here, and we'll come back in and add some detail, but you can kind of play with it a little bit more and control where the water goes using the tip of the brush if you take some of that water away in that area, so it's not just flooding in to this guy. And I'm going to give some shadow to the bottom of this one too, bottom being this side down here. All right, let's go ahead and just continue to flood in the rest of these. So I'm gonna do this guy right here. Using so much water. Do you see how many times I'm going back to my water? So many times. Really to make sure that it's very watery. All right. So if you guys have ideas of other things you want to see me paint other than cacti, then you can go ahead and comment it down below. I would appreciate that, so I know what things you guys want to learn how to paint. All right, so now I'm just doing the same thing again. I'm just dropping in a little bit more color into the bottom area of this cactus right here. And see how it kind of like is uneven and perfect? We want to leave it like that. We want it to look like that so that it's super natural and it's not like a perfect line or perfectly blended. We want it to have kind of like a natural, loose, and artistic look to it. And I'm just kind of dragging some of the darker color up the side. There we go. So that's how I'm gonna leave that one for now. Now another pointer is that watercolor dries 30% lighter than what you're seeing right now. So don't be afraid to use color. I really like to make mine really neutral by adding browns and blacks into my brighter colors like greens and yellows, just because it's gonna end up being a little bit too vibrant unless I'm painting like a peony or something really vibrant for a pattern or something. But I always kind of neutralize them a little bit, bring the tones down with those darker, more natural colors. But you can use brighter colors if you want to, but I just always make sure to use a good amount of color. Always a lot of water, but a good amount of color so that it actually shows up pretty good. But that's also why we want to add layers on. So because it dries 30% lighter, we are going to want to add layers into this if you want to add more depth. But you can see I'm just doing the same thing again. I create the paddle with the lighter version of the green, which all it is just a more watered down version. So all my dark and my light greens are in here. It's the same exact thing. So this is my light green, and my dark green is basically just that mixed with more brown and more green and a little more sepia or black, and it's just the same thing. If I were to spread out that dark green, it's actually just gonna look like the light green. So basically the key is the water. The water is like adding white, but we don't really add white in watercolor except for some specific details or for some special effects. But instead of adding white to our painting to make colors lighter, we add water, and the water acts like a lightening agent kind of thing. So now I'm just making a little more of my dark color. So sometimes I like to play with my color in washes where the color's spreading in, and I even use like blues in my mix. So if I add like a little bit of dark blue, it might look kind of cool. Let's see. You won't notice it too much, but it will just add like an extra kind of color to make it look fun. So all of these are still pretty wet, so you have to be careful what you do to them. They're just gonna spread the color in, but I'm just gonna add a little bit of blue because I think it's gonna add some fun color to it. And you can't really notice that it's super blue because it's getting blended into the green, but it's pretty much just like a deep dark blue. Like that. All right, so I'm gonna do the light green again, and this is where it gets tricky because this is wet, so I might have to turn this a bit. But I'm gonna go ahead and work on this one over here. You can see the blues kind of in my brush still. That's okay, I just like to work with my colors blended together. It looks really natural. I'm gonna spread this all the way around. Need a little more green in here. See how if it's wet, you can keep playing with it. That is the key. If you use enough water, you can keep adjusting it until it's the way you want it. And just like I pointed out in the last class, my last mini course, you don't want to try to make it perfect. You definitely want the watercolor to just kind of do its thing. Like, I'm not going to worry about these little details in here. Like, I'll just kind of touch it up and make sure that it has smooth sides, but I'm not going to worry about like the color drying differently here, or if it doesn't look perfectly even. You actually want to leave it that way so it has some interest to it, and that's really the uniqueness of watercolor. I'm a perfectionist, and I know a lot of people who actually fall in love with watercolor are too, and this definitely helps me just relax and let things go. The more I watercolor, the more I find the beauty in things just being the way they are. And that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons I love watercolor. Here we go. So that is gonna blend in really nicely. Right, so another trick that people tend to overuse, you don't want to overuse it, is if you do have a mistake or you want to lighten an area, you can take a tissue. I don't recommend a paper towel, but if you don't have tissues, that will work. So I'm going to go ahead and take this tissue, and it's really clean right now, and I'm just going to blot that dot that was sitting around in here. And if you wanted to, if something was like really dark or it's like spreading in here and you just don't want it to, you can blot it very carefully, and you only want to do this like once or twice, and then leave it. And that will help, that will help clean up an area that might have a mistake or you just want to lighten a little bit. Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to tilt this a little bit and let the water run across the cactus so that it gives it a cool marbling effect in here. Alright. Okay, so let's work on a few more, basically doing the exact same thing. Alright. Just using my bigger brush still and bringing the color all the way across this. Sorry, there's a hair in my brush. Don't want that. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop the color in. So that's the darker green. Again, I'm just dropping it into the side here and letting it blend across the cactus. So if you are trying this at home and you end up posting a picture of your cactus that you made along with me, or whatever you're making using these techniques, you can go ahead and tag me at Morgan Victoria Design. I really want to see what you're making and be able to share it. So that's on Instagram at Morgan Victoria Design. Alright, and then let's do this one over here. Notice how I started with like a more concentrated, darker version of the paint, and then now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spread it out. Just like that. And now I'm going to drop this in there. Do I look? I really like how that's a little darker and more blue toned. I'm actually going to take a little bit more of my blue. You can see it's pretty dark blue right here. And maybe mix in a little green. I'm going to drop some in here to give this like a bit of a shadow. Okay, let's connect this all the way around. This is what I call touching it up. So I'm just going to drop a little bit of blue in here. I don't want to mess with it too much, and then maybe an extra bit of blue in some of these areas. Now, if you're using a color palette that doesn't have a dark blue, you can use a really bright blue, like if you have a light blue or medium blue, use medium blue. Some purple is usually helpful, and black. And bringing that all together will make a nice deep blue. Or a dark green, some medium blue, and black will make also a nice deep blue. The difference will be one's a little bit more warm and purpley, and the other one's going to be a little bit more teal and cool, like green hues. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add one here. It's kind of coming off the page like so. Or coming back into the page. Alright, tissue technique where we clean up any mistakes like that. Just go back over this. Alright. I think that looks pretty dang good. It's supposed to be just nice and loose and free. Now let's go ahead and work on our details. So I really want to add a pop of like pink and red to this and make some prickly pear fruits. So let's see. I'm just going to use some bright pink or bright red. And you can honestly mix in orange too to your pink to make it even more vibrant and a little bit more bold. Let's see what I come up with here. So I'm just taking some pink and I have some more of a red and a little bit of orange. Let's test that color out. All right, that is a cute color. I really like that. Now I'm gonna just start with like a lighter version of it. So we make that by just bringing in more water. So for example, you can see I'm blending over the top of blue. I'm just totally letting it blend in. It's totally fine. But that's the lighter version and I'll test that on my test card. But you can see I just added more water to it to kind of dilute it. And if I want it to be more vibrant, because that's not super vibrant, I can either drop in some color or I can bring it into my palette where I'm blending. Okay. So I'm using my bigger brush still, but you can absolutely switch to your smaller one, which I think I'm gonna do right about here. So this is my size 5, and you can go smaller than that, but you don't want to go too small or it won't carry enough water. So this again is still super watery. I'm just creating that puddle in the shape of what I am creating, basically a prickly pear shape. And those are kind of like berries. They're kind of little fruits that grow on the cactus. And they're just kind of like little rounded buds. I'm gonna make one right here too. You can see why I don't want my pencil to show up, because sometimes I don't follow it exactly and I don't want it to stand out too much. Let's do this one over here. I am going to drop in some brighter color to these because I just think they're not bright enough yet. But I'm going to leave it with like kind of a flatter top because they have that kind of shape. Let's do another one like peeking out from back here. And maybe we'll do, let's do like another one on top of here. All right, let me do another one. But I'm doing all these at once. You can definitely just start with one and then add more as you go, if that's a little bit easier for you. But because I know that they're all pretty much going to stay wet since I used a lot of water, I'm just going to start with that and do all of them at once. All right, so now's the fun part. I'm gonna go ahead and grab some pink and some red, some really bright colors here, and I'm just gonna drop these babies in. And I'm kind of dropping it into like the bottom left area so it can like do its own blending across the prickly pear. But I'm just gonna drop that in, give it that bright, bold red or pink look. All right, if you can hear yelling in the background, my husband and my dad are playing golf together, so that's what you're hearing. All right, a little bit brighter. Now you can see that it's blending in here, which you can take a tissue at this point and clean it up, but I actually kind of love it when it blends into the cactus a little bit. It just makes it look a little bit more watercolor-esque and gives it that artistic look, so I'm just gonna leave it. And then let's do another, or should we do another one? So once your cactus is dry, you can go ahead and use a darker green again, more concentrated with less water, to just start adding little dots everywhere, and all I'm doing is using the point of my brush. I'm not pressing it into my paper, I'm just barely touching it to my paper to create little dots everywhere. And these should be really unevenly spaced, so they should just be spread out and scattered throughout each paddle, so they're not perfectly spaced. Otherwise it's gonna look too perfect and just kind of look weird. Since it is a natural cactus, you just want to leave it a little bit uneven. And if we fill in where it's wet, so you can see kind of in here it's still wet, it's gonna spread. So I'm just gonna leave that until it dries and I'll go back over it. Alright, so I've finished up adding some of the speckles. As you can see, some of them are imperfect and just kind of bled a little, and I'm just gonna leave it like that because this is a little bit more loose and abstract. So we are gonna use some white in this for the prickly pears, the little fruits on there, and I'm just gonna take a little bit of white. So I have my dry white right here. I'm gonna bring some water into it, but not a lot, which is very different than the rest of watercolor. And I'm just kind of mixing it up to make it very pasty. And there's, again, not a lot of water in here. It's mainly just the white. And I'm just going to use the point of this to add little speckles to the prickly pears. And the technique I'm using for this is I'm kind of clustering it around one side, like it's getting a little bit more highlight and you can see some more speckling. And then I'm just spreading it out across the side. And you can just kind of pick how you want to do that, but I'm just kind of dotting these and giving them just a little bit of extra detail. And you can definitely use a smaller brush for this if you would like, but I just use my medium sized brush that I have here. And rub a speckle across like that. So you're not using a lot of water for the white, just a little bit, and keeping it really pasty. I don't usually recommend holding so far away on the brush. I always say hold a little bit closer if you're trying to get really detailed, and then if you're trying to make it really loose then and have less control on where the speckles land, then you can hold farther away. Again, I'm just keeping it really loose. So that is kind of what it's looking like. These will dry kind of translucent and light. That's just kind of how it goes with the white, especially if there's a little bit more water in it, then they will dry a little bit lighter. Alright, so lastly, we are going to add a little bit of splatter, which I think just makes this look a little bit more fun. And I'm going to use my bigger brush for this. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get it pretty wet. I'm going to go back to my green, and I think I'm going to use a little more blue in it this time to make it a little bit brighter, a little bit more vibrant, and a little more green. So it looks kind of like that. It's more green than when we added the brown and the black in. So it has a little more color to it, like that. Okay, and then I'll test it on my test card first so you can see, but there's kind of two ways to splatter. There's the way where you take a bunch of water and you scoop up some of that color you made and you really like flick it at the paper, and it creates kind of like lines you can see that splat out. Or we can take a lot of water, take some of our color, and we can tap it and it creates little speckles. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the second version where it's like tapping on the brush. And I'm going to take some water, I'm going to take some of my color, and then I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to put my finger under it like this, and I'm going to splatter it like this. And that is really fun. So I just kind of leave it like that, and that is my fun little splatter. I actually think, let's go ahead and add some pink. Here I am thinking I'm done and then wanting to do more. Let's add a little bit of pink and orange so it doesn't look super unbalanced. Alright. A little orange, just getting my color mixed up. And it's the color I have, yep. And we're gonna go ahead and get our brush really wet. Take our brush. Don't want to overdo it, but it is fun to have some color on there. So that's that, and then you can go ahead and sign it. This will look super cute framed if you want to hang it up in your home. And again, I'll give you the printout version of the sketch so you can trace over it and you don't have to come up with the shapes on your own. So thank you for joining me, guys. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you would like to see more videos of how to paint, and I'll be doing all kinds of different things. Go ahead and comment what kind of things you want to see me paint and what other kinds of tutorials you want to see so I can know what you guys want. Thanks, guys.